Jim Sales, I want to welcome you back to the Texas Law Center and tell you how much I appreciate your willingness to be a part of this program today.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. President. That's really kind of you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I kind of want to go back to the beginning and ask you what it was in your upbringing that drew you to become a lawyer. What made you think that was a good way to go?
The truth is, nothing in my upbringing had one thing to do with my being a lawyer. Probably my being a lawyer is the most serendipitous event that has ever occurred, and perhaps is the ultimate definition of serendipity. I graduated from a 1A high school, had no chemistry lab, had no physics lab, and so I went to the University of Texas thinking I wanted to be an engineer, because in those days, being an engineer or a doctor was the two preferred professions. And after one semester in chemistry with all of the students who had graduated from these 5A and 4A high schools that had 2 and 3 years of chemistry, I knew that engineering was not for me. So I just transferred to get a degree in history and mathematics, with the idea that I'd either stay in the U.S. Marine Corps, because I was about to get my commission through the Naval ROTC, and either stay a career officer, depending on how things worked out, or think of something else once I got out of the Marine Corps.
So it wasn't math that drove you into the law, but chemistry. Math drove a lot of us over there.
Chemistry drove me out of engineering and into law.
Well, that was our good fortune as a profession. Jim, do tell me about your upbringing, a little bit about your parents and your family and some of the influences in your early life.
I grew up in a very modest community, a town called Weimar, Texas, Colorado County. Columbus is the county seat. Back in those days, it was a farming community, rural community, very modest families. No one had money in those days. Went to parochial school, then to Weimar High School, which was then a 1A high school, although we played in football 2A schools, and that's why my nose seems to be a little bit out of kilter. We didn't play with helmet with bars on them. And I really didn't have a lot of influences. I did have a couple of teachers in school that thought that I ought to go to college. Not too many graduates from Weimar went to college in those days, and I had no money, and the parents had no money. So really, I guess a teacher who taught FFA named Bob Moore, who was a war veteran who made the Normandy landing and who I admired greatly, talked me into, he said, you really need to try to go to college, and I'll help you to the extent I can.
Well, and is that where your interest in the Marine Corps began?
I guess, I don't know where that preoccupation came from. My wife had a very close cousin who was a Marine and who was killed at Tarawa, in the landing on Tarawa, where they had to wade in to the island 500 yards under fire, and he lost his life there, and she used to talk about him a lot, and maybe that's where the embryo of the idea was germinated. I don't know.
What year did you come to the University of Texas from Weimar?
I came to the university in 1952, I think, Harper, and it was back, Korea was still going full force, and mandatory draft, and I decided I was going to get a commission, and so I enrolled in the Naval ROTC with the idea I would get my commission in the U.S. Marine Corps through the Naval ROTC.
And did you, in fact, go to the Marine Corps upon graduation?
I did. I graduated June 1 of '56, got commissioned June 2nd of '56, got married June 3rd of 1956.
Busy week.
Had a 3-day honeymoon, and my wife, who was in nurses training at Breckenridge Hospital here in Austin, had to stay behind to finish, and I had to report to Quantico to Officer Basic School, and so I took off, and she went back to Austin, and then rejoined me at Quantico in September of '56.
Tell us a little bit about your Marine Corps career. What kind of work you did, and
Well, after Officer Basic, which is where the decision-making came in for me, they decided to ship me to the 3rd Marine Division, which was a Fleet Marine Force located in Japan and Okinawa, and also had battalions aboard fleet ships in the Far East. And of course, my wife had to stay behind, and she was at that time pregnant with our first child. So she returned to Weimar to stay with her folks. And I was in the Marine Corps. I was overseas for 16 months. I served as platoon commander for Weapons Company, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, and then got promoted to executive officer of Weapons Company, and ended my term there with the 3rd Marine Division as assistant operations officer for the battalion. When my tour was up and I returned to pick up my wife, because I had already decided, being away from my wife for a total of 18 months out of our first 24 months of marriage was not the way I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And so that's really how I made a decision that I would not be a Marine officer for the rest of my life.
and didn't get to see your first child very often?
I came home to see my first child, and a child who you know very well, Mark Sales, the day before his first birthday, his first time I saw him.
Wow.
And he's never forgiven me for returning.
That's pretty tough, though, on a dad.
It was tougher on my son, who developed asthma from the trauma of having his dad pick him up in Weimar and take him to Austin 3 days away from his real parents, who were his grandparents.
Right, and put him in all this cedar.
Absolutely.
That would do it. So you left the Marine Corps and came to law school at the
Came to
university?
law school. I had already sort of decided if I didn't make the Marine Corps career, I would probably look at the law, because I don't know, some people thought I might have an aptitude for the law. I frankly did not know, because till then I had never been in a courtroom or courthouse. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't have any lawyers in the family, didn't know any lawyers, and so the law was a total unknown to me.
Well, before we leave the Marine Corps, is there anything that you took from that experience that has informed your career as a lawyer?
Yes, there were 3 lessons that they taught me very well that have served me in a great stead as a professional, as a lawyer, and particularly as a trial lawyer. The first one was that you have to develop a self-reliance, that you cannot be dependent on anybody. You have to be able to survive on your own, by yourself, by your own creativity and wits. Secondly, that of course, being as a Marine officer, they teach you leadership, and that if you are a leader, you lead, and that means that once you're given a mission or an objective, you take the personnel that are assigned to you to accomplish that mission, and you achieve it, and you do so by whatever means are necessary. But failure to complete the mission successfully is never an option in the Corps, and that has served me well in life. And the third lesson they teach you is that when you're given a mission, even though it may seem impossible, that there is no such thing as an impossible mission or an impossible objective. That if you have a well thought out plan, you develop patience, and you have tenacity and a persistence, you will achieve. It may take you longer than you anticipate, but you can achieve even the impossible.
Well, I have seen a little bit of that in my opportunities to work with you on access to justice and other issues, that really did stick with you. I guess it made you a better law student too, the discipline and the
Well,
work habits.
it did, except for the fact that we still had no money, because back then they were paying second lieutenants and then first lieutenants $222.27 a month plus $40 for room and board, which doesn't mean you can save any money. So when I picked my wife up, we really didn't have any money in our bank account. She was a registered nurse, and so when we came to Texas, she obtained a job as a nurse in charge of the women's alcoholic unit at the mental institution here in Austin, which at that time didn't pay very much in the 50s, late 50s. I got a job with the securities board working 20 hours, which was the max that they would allow you to work. And I was on the 27-month program, which means that you start law school in June and you just keep going to law school till you graduate in August 2.5 years later.
With no real breaks.
No breaks.
So,
and
a little bit like the Marine Corps. Working
exactly.
in.
That's why the Marine Corps really prepared me for it. And to complicate our lives a little further, we had a second child while in school, and both children were babies, and both were somewhat ill during their infancy, and one had colic and one had asthma. So we didn't sleep a whole lot either. And so between not having money and two children to take care of, I think I went through law school without reading a single case.
Well, you did pretty well.
Well, I survived.
Now, your second child, would that be Debbie?
Debbie,
Okay.
my middle child.
Okay, your middle child, and then Travis.
Travis
your
is the
third.
youngest.
Okay. Well, tell me about law school, how you liked it, what you think you gained from it.
Well, law school back in those days was pretty tough. We had some of the old breed of law school professors. Dean Keaton was the dean. We had such legendary giants of the legal academia as Professor Charles McCormick, George Stumberg, who taught conflicts, Gus Hodges, who taught special issues and procedure. I'm drawing some blanks here. I know John Sutton taught ethics. Bug Bailey was our probate and estates teacher. All of them characters in their own right, and very demanding in their curriculum.
Pushed you pretty hard.
They pushed very hard.
Okay.
In fact, it felt like I was back in officer boot camp.
Okay. Of those classes that you took, did you begin to develop an idea of what you wanted to do, or which professor influenced you the most?
No, the truth is, we were so busy in law school, and we were so broke, no money. We were living hand to mouth, literally, and that when it came time to look for a job, back when I graduated, which was actually August of 1960, jobs were very scarce. We had people on Texas Law Review who were interviewing for jobs for claims adjuster with insurance companies and various jobs. There was not a lot of recruiting at that time, and my job with Fulbright and Jaworski, as it turned out, was serendipitous also.
So just another one of those good luck things that came along.
Absolutely, because I was in that 27-month around-the-clock program. My class didn't fall during the normal recruiting season, so we missed the period when most of the firms came up to recruit. And so recruiting the August graduates was much slimmer. And I had a few job offers, but not anything that stirred my soul. I just needed a job that would pay some money.
Right.
I didn't care what it was.
You needed to take care of your family.
And it turned out that Fulbright and Jaworski had already recruited at Texas, but they apparently decided that they had an offer outstanding for litigation for someone who had already graduated from an Eastern law school, and that person had not decided to take it. And I think they were getting squeamish that that person would not accept that employment. So they came up here recruiting for one position, that is for litigation. And at that time, I was interviewing for anybody that wanted somebody to work. It didn't make any difference what it was. So I interviewed, and they said, we'll take you up to Houston, fly you up in the morning, fly you back at 1 o'clock, and we'll let you know.
Pretty quick.
Back in those days, they didn't have recruiting and
No,
summer
no
clerkships.
cocktail parties, ball games, anything like that?
I think they spent probably a total of $15 on me. But after they finished, they called me and said, we will give you this offer, but we will have to tell you it's a conditional offer. And I said, what do you mean conditional? And they said, we have an offer outstanding for this job, but the person to whom that prior offer has been made has not indicated acceptance or rejection, and we have to give him 3 more weeks to make a decision. So I jumped at the chance. I said, well, I'll take it, even if I don't know. I'll just hope for the best.
Right.
And I was getting very concerned because I hadn't heard from him in about 2.5 weeks. And just before the expiration of the 3rd week, they called and they said, if you still want the job, it's yours. I said, I'm your man.
And you've been there ever since?
I've been there ever since.
Well, tell us about your early career, who you got to work with and who your mentors were.
Well, when I joined the firm, Leon Jaworski of Watergate fame was the managing partner of the firm. Kraft W. Admont, UT grad, was a senior partner and head of the litigation department. And Gibson Gale Jr., who I think maybe y'all have interviewed for the Legends, was a newly minted trial partner and the person to whom I was assigned to do work for and who was my supervisor. And the layout was that those were the hierarchy, and my job was to do whatever I was told by not only those 3 gentlemen, but by any other partner, participating associate, or associate with a higher rank than I had. And since I had no rank, I was the go-to person for every flunky job in the firm.
Well, how big was the firm at that time?
I think at that time I was the 68th lawyer in the law firm. And at that time we had offices in Houston and in Washington because one of the founding partners was a Washington practitioner.
So you worked a lot with Gibson Gale.
Yes, in fact, the first year I did 4 briefs for him in 4 cases that he had tried.
He tells me about a year that you won a ridiculous number of appeals on cases he had tried in 1 year. I forget the number he said. He wouldn't forget it.
No, he does not. His memory is like a computer chip. It
Right.
is infallible.
But he said there was a year that you pulled him out of the fire pretty regularly.
No one had to pull Gibson Gale out of the fire. He was quite a lawyer, and he needed no help at all. I just came along.
Well, was he a mentor to you?
He was very much a mentor, a very significant influence in my life.
What are the traits that you learned from him that you've carried forward in your practice?
Well, there are a multitude, but the ones that would stand out in my mind are that he was the consummate gentleman. He treated everyone with courtesy, civility, kind of a Southern gentleman in every sense of the word. And it was his nature. It was not something he worked at. In addition to his courtesy and civility, he was very collegial. He interacted well with people, whether he knew them or not. He never met anyone who was not a friend. He was a person who, in my judgment, epitomized integrity. He's a man, if he told you something, you could absolutely go to the bank and deposit it. It was good as gold. And that was probably the most important trait that I picked up from him as being the one that was to be the most valuable trait I picked up and used in my coming September 50 years of practice.
Well, and he's also one that gave a lot back to the profession and in the community, and obviously that carried over to you as well.
Precisely. A lot of my bar involvement is really a testament to Gibb because I tried to emulate him because what he did I thought was so superb, and everything he did was so magnificent that if I could just follow in his footsteps, even if I couldn't achieve the heights that he achieved, that I would have accomplished quite a bit in my career.
Well, you were in the trial section. I guess you began trying lawsuits pretty quickly.
Very quickly, within 3 years, I had a full docket of probably 230 to 250 cases at any given time.
And in those days, you tried a lot more cases in a given
Yes.
year.
We didn't have all this discovery. You tried cases blind because people didn't take depositions. You didn't have to disclose experts. You didn't have to disclose witnesses. You just went over to the courthouse, announced ready, and you tried your lawsuit.
Went back to thinking on your feet.
Absolutely. And the greatest training a trial lawyer can get is trying lawsuits in that fashion.
Did you enjoy the work when you found yourself serendipitously in it?
Terrifically so. I don't know what kind of trial lawyer I ever turned out to be, but I enjoyed it immensely. Houston was a great center for trial talent and trial advocacy. Some of the great legends in the trial community in the country came from Houston on both sides of the docket, the plaintiff side and defense side. And so I had a chance over my lifetime to challenge, if you would, in court between the lines in the sand in front of a judge and jury, some of the best trial talent that our profession's ever seen.
Who were some of those great lawyers you got to work with and against that you learned from and carried over into your career?
Well, every lawyer against whom I tried a lawsuit, even some of those who I didn't think were all that good, I learned something. I learned something in every trial I ever went into. Some of the great ones who really overwhelmed me and impressed me were people like Joe Jamel and Gus Coleus, his partner. They're just fabulous. John Hill and his partner, Barry, I'm drawing a blank right now. Bob Steely was his partner. One of his great partners, and one whom I tried a lot of lawsuits with, and who I have tremendous admiration for, even though he's now deceased, was Will Watkins, great trial lawyer. George Pletcher, they called a baby-faced assassin, was fabulous as a trial lawyer, and going against him, you had to use all your skills and all your wit just to hold your own.
And when you would go to trial against these giants, was it just kind of you against them? You're doing your own briefing, your own preparation work?
Yes, Fulbright at that time had I don't know if it was a theory or had a culture that a lawsuit was like a war, you know, one war, one ranger. And so when you sent them over to try the case, it was you versus whoever they had on the other side. And as a result, some very memorable trials emanated from that experience.
And you had to be good at both the law and the facts, I guess, to work in that culture and environment.
I always believe that when you first got a lawsuit, you went to the books and you found out what the law was, so that you knew what you had to prove or what they had to prove, so that when you took depositions or when you took discovery, you could focus and pistol shot your questions accordingly. And I found that to be very helpful.
Well, you enjoy writing. It's obvious when you look at the body of work that you've taught at lots of CLE courses and published a lot. When did your love of research and writing begin?
My research started with a case that they put me on immediately when I joined the firm, well, within a year after I joined the firm, called Quick versus Braniff Airways. It involved a crash of a Braniff Lockheed Electra in a trip between Houston and Dallas and Dawson, Texas. And John Hill and two of his partners, Jim Kronzer, who was one of the great book lawyers of all time, and one of his younger partners, tried that case against Braniff, Lockheed, and Detroit Diesel, who made the engine. And in that case, Kraft Adman and Bob Carsey firm had Detroit Diesel. Frank Knapp from Butler Binion represented one defendant. Bill Harvin at Baker Botts represented one defendant. And there was one other defendant who escapes me right now. But I had the chance not only to carry the briefcases and to prepare and argue motions, but to do the briefing. Mm-hmm. And in that case involved a lot of briefing because there were a plethora of issues that evolved, of course.
And you became something of an expert in products liability and areas like that over time.
Because of that, yes, I kept a notebook, and that notebook began to grow as I would jot down cases as they would come out from the courts of appeal and the Supreme Court.
Well, you've had a great deal of success as a trial lawyer. You're a fellow in the American College of Trial Lawyers, which I guess is one of the highest honors
well, we think so anyway.
Tell us about some of the cases that you found most challenging and what was challenging about them.
I would say there were two cases that come to mind pretty quickly that I consider most challenging for different reasons. One of the cases was a case called Witcher versus General Motors Corporation, and I was representing General Motors. It involved a alleged steering defect in a '69 Chevrolet. And General Motors had just tried a very similar case, the same automobile, the same defect, and had gotten a humongous verdict in that case. It involved a paraplegic. And so they came to Colonel Jaworski and they said, "Colonel, we want you to handle this case because we just got hit very hard and we're going to try this back in the same venue, different judge, but same venue, and we're concerned about it, and we really want to get the best." And of course, they thought they were getting the colonel. Well, the colonel called me in while they were there and said, "Our Jim Sales, who is about to make partner, he's about to make partner." Mm-hmm. Not to put any stress on me.
Not put any pressure on you.
And he said, "Our Mr. Sales will handle this case, and I assure you that he will get you a good result. He's a very fine trial lawyer." And the guy on the other side of the case was Will Watkins, Jim Kronzer, and one of their young associates. And I was representing General Motors. And Will had tried the other case where they had gotten
So he had already been down that road, yeah.
And so he had the same car, the same experts. He had already basically had a full trial.
Right.
And it was in Judge Woodrow Seals' United States District Court, which was a different court. And it was set in 3 months. And I said to the colonel, I said, "Colonel, I can try it, but I need more time. There's no real discovery in this case, and we need more discovery." So together we went to Judge Seals and petitioned him for a motion for continuance and a little more time. I think he gave us 3 months.
So you had 6 months.
6 months to get a case ready, and it was winter time, so I had to go to Detroit, run tests in knee-deep snow, go to Buffalo to take depositions in the snow. It was a horrendous experience for me, not to mention the colonel's pressure that he put on me. Right. But we went to trial. We were in trial for, I think, 8 weeks. And the plaintiff was the wife and her husband. She was 22, he was 23. He was brain dead, not brain dead, but brain injury, brain impaired, I guess is the term, quadriplegic. So he was quadriplegic from the neck down, plus his brain was permanently damaged.
Catastrophic injury.
And he was in a nursing home, and the doctor said he would have a normal life expectancy at 23. So I was looking at potentially some very large
Big
damages.
economic model.
Yes, and so and Will had a mock-up of the engine, and he was claiming a certain component would hang up under certain conditions of driving, which is exactly the design defect that he had argued in the prior case. And so we went to trial, and it was a real dogfight because it was just me, and I had an associate to sort of keep up with documents and what have you. And Will Watkins, who was much my senior and had tried a lot more lawsuits than I had, was the prime trial lawyer, but he also had a young partner with him, and then he had Jim Kronzer as his law partner. And of course, when Jim stood up to speak, Judge Seals would listen. And when I stood up to speak, I had to get his attention a little more. But we banged around on that, and it was a no-holds-barred contest. But I really felt this was a make-or-break case for me, because with the Colonel's introduction, that if I really got hit big time, I might as well pack my bags and look for other employment. And thankfully, the jury was out about a day and a half, and they came back with a verdict for me. They basically poured the plaintiff out, said it was his fault and 0 damages. And we had quite a bit of money on the table, which made me feel very good. And I was ecstatic. And but before I got the big head, I thought about it at night after the verdict and said, you know, I think that jury just felt sorry for me. I mean, they were beating on me so badly.
They thought you were outmatched?
Outmatched and outwitted, and they just felt sorry for me and gave me the verdict.
Well,
So
and I guess the Colonel came through and you made partner.
I made partner, so it worked out. The other one that I thought was unique was a case in Waxahachie, Ellis County. Bill Allen, who was a partner, one of the top trial partners in John Hill's firm, had just left the firm, and he was on his own. And he had filed a case up in Waxahachie, and I had answered it. It was a suit for a guy named Billy Ganaway. And I think our client was Anderson Clayton. They had an all mill in Waxahachie, and they ground up cotton hulls and made cottonseed meal and what have you for selling to the cattlemen. Right. And Billy Ganaway had one of the biggest feedlot operations in the whole county, and all of his cattle died. And his experts said he died of arsenic poisoning. And the charge was that the hulls that we ground up had been defoliated, the cottonseed hulls had been defoliated with a substance, a chemical that contained arsenic, and indeed it did. And that the arsenic residue that was in the cottonseed mill killed them. Bill Allen filed a case. His daddy was sitting as the judge.
That's kind of tough.
It was, and I filed a motion to recuse. Well, I had looked at the law, and the law said that's not a basis for recusal.
They didn't make that till the 80s.
But I went and had a hearing anyway. He got the judge from Ennis to hear it. Of course, he overruled me, and we went back before Judge Allen. In the meantime, Bill Allen hired George Pletcher, the baby-faced assassin, to be the first chair trial lawyer, with Bill Allen being second chair. And before I could hire local counsel to help me, the only one in Waxahachie at the time was Warwick Jenkins, and they hired him. So it was me and an associate versus George Pletcher, Bill Allen, and Warwick Jenkins, and of course the judge was Bill Allen's daddy.
Felt a little bit on the outside, did you?
I really did, and I thought this was going to be a real country whipping, because every time I objected, we'd go up to the bench, and Judge Allen would say to Warwick Jenkins, what do you think about that objection? He said, it's not any good, Judge. I think it ought to be overruled. And the judge said, you know, I agree with that. Overruled. We'd get up again. Warwick would look at me and kind of smile and said, Judge, I think you ought to grant this one. So
throw you a bone every now and then.
Yeah, throw me a bone. And that's what he did. He threw me a bone. And this was back in the days before they even had women on the jury. So I mean, he had 12 country farmers up there sitting on that jury panel. But as luck would have it, I found me 3 Aggie engineers, One was, well, not engineers, they were veterinarians. One was a pathologist in veterinary medicine. One was a surgeon in veterinary medicine. The other one was a general veterinarian who taught veterinary school. So I hired all three of them, and they examined the remains of the carcasses, and apparently arsenic can be detected in the hair follicles of humans or animals. And anyway, through their study, they came up with the idea that this arsenic was in the system, true, but 10 times the dose that they showed would not have killed them. That this was clearly a viral disease that just ran right through, just like the flu epidemic when it hits.
Right.
It just ran right through the herd and killed all the feedlot cattle in Waxahachie. And these three veterinarian professors made such great witnesses that even though I'm a TSIP, I've always been a supporter of Aggie Land just because of that. But they talked, and those farmers sitting on that jury panel, I mean, they listened. I could tell they were listening. And George kept trying to throw them off with objections and what have you, but at the end of about a 3-week trial, they came back and said the product was not defective. It did not kill the cattle.
You know, that's interesting because jury trials and juries are the subject of a lot of criticism. And there was a situation where everything was stacked against you, and yet 12 ordinary citizens made a pretty good decision. What do you think about the changes that have occurred in what many call the vanishing jury trial and what the future of the jury trials are?
I see that, and it is occurring. Whereas when I started trying lawsuits, trying 15 to 20 jury verdicts, plus trying another 20 cases that settled after voir dire or after the plaintiff testified, was common. And then in the early to mid 80s, that started to change as fee schedules became more restrictive. Clients became less inclined to try cases. They started balancing the cost versus the probable result, and they started making business decisions rather than decisions on the merits. And so trial started waning in those days. And then unfortunately, lawyers were already proliferating, and fees started escalating, I think maybe even out of proportion of what was called for in the marketplace. And that made clients even more reluctant to try cases. Plus, every now and again, there was an errant verdict that caused the clients to develop the shivers when they went to the jury. So as a result of the combination of fees and maybe unpredictability in the juries, jury trials have started vanishing.
Do you think we're losing something?
We have lost a lot.
Tell me what you think society is losing in that occurring.
Well, the trial lawyer, to me, is the overall craftsman of the profession. A trial lawyer can do anything. May not be able to do a M&A transaction, but literally a trial lawyer can do almost anything and can improvise at a moment's notice. To me, they are very valuable in not only helping clients with a variety of problems very effectively, but they also tend to be the leadership of the bar. If you look at the bar leaders of the local bars, of the state bar, of the national bar, the majority, at least of the top leaders, have all been very active and very effective trial lawyers. They just seem to have a leadership quality, and that comes through to juries, and that's why certain people make good trial lawyers, and some people, if they stayed at it for 100 years, would never be able to present a case to a jury.
I guess you feel fortunate to have practiced and lived in a time when you got to do that.
I was young at exactly the right time. When I started practicing, jury trials were just beginning. And when I retired in 2000, jury trials were already on the downhill slide and waning fast. I contend that I practiced in the golden age of trial, that was the age of the magnificent breed, the true warrior who went to trial, who did battle, did it fairly, did it honestly, no holds barred, no quarter asked and none given. But at the end of the battle, each shook hands with mutual respect for one another, and maybe even went down the street and had a beer.
Right. And that leads to a topic that I think we're all interested in, and that is the area of civility and professionalism, because you did practice, at least for the most part early in your career, in an age where lawyers really liked each other, even when they were doing battle with one another.
Exactly so. And in Harris County, we had what we call the Friday morning docket call. That's where all the cases that were going to be tried that week were called, and you had to show up and answer ready or not ready, and you were given a number starting with 1 all the way up through 400. And then as each case was assigned, the next case was called for trial. And so the plaintiff's bar and defense bar would merge together on Friday morning to answer docket call. And while at docket call, we would talk about settlement, or we'd talk about whether we could maybe continue the case for another deposition, or whether we just need to try this case. And so there was a collegiality that developed. And importantly back then, critically important, was that a trial lawyer's word was his or her bond. You never, ever told a lie, you never misrepresented, you never withheld. If somebody called you up and said, Sales, do you have this document, or do you have these statements? You said yes or no, and in most cases you said, do you want to come over and look at them? And I would do the same with the other side. Now there were a small group on either side that played hardball.
Right.
And everybody knew who they were, and they were treated accordingly. But the vast majority of the bar, plaintiff and defense bar, were very collegial, had a mutual understanding and a mutual respect for one another, and in fact, probably palled around together more with each other than with members of our own firm.
I suspect that some of your best friends, that people you count as your best friends, are lawyers you've worked against.
Absolutely. So, the truth is, some of my best friends are plaintiffs' lawyers who have taken my measure. Occasionally I took their measure, but usually they took mine.
Well, you know, we talked earlier about one of the problems is the increased cost, and it's not just making nice, this discussion of civility, but it really has something to do with making the system work, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It makes the system work. It gives it credibility with the public, because the jury, made up of the members of the public, see this and they gauge our profession and the rule of law as it's applied in society. They govern it, or they judge it, I should say, accordingly. And if lawyers are cutting corners, or being snide with one another, or making nasty comments as sidebar remarks, or being disrespectful to the judge, it creates a very bad atmosphere for the jury, and they take with them a perception of the profession as a whole as being something less than virtuous or reverential.
I think that's absolutely true, and I guess if you have to have a hearing on every little thing, somebody has to pay for that.
Absolutely, and we rarely had hearings. If I needed something, I called the other lawyer up and said, do you have this? If they had it, 90% of the time they'd say, sure, I'll send you a copy, or come over and look at my file. And I would do the same.
Here's the $64,000 question. Did that ever cost you something in terms of your ability to represent your client, that kind of civility and collegiality?
No, as a matter of fact, I think it enhanced my client's position because the lawyers that I dealt with, the ones that I had confidence in, which were most of them, if they said we can settle this for X number of dollars, I knew pretty well that that was what it would take to settle it within certain parameters. And I could go to my client and say, this is what we settle it for, and if you don't want to settle it for that, we need to try it, but let's make the decision. And this is a lawyer who doesn't bluff. If he or she says this is the way the facts are, you can pretty well count on the fact that the facts are going to come out pretty much that way. We may be able to make some headway, but and then there were some cases where the facts were just so diametrically opposed to each other that you had to try it.
Right.
Both sides recognized that, and you went to trial, best of friends. But once the judge said ready for trial, it was no holds barred within the limits of the rules. Now, no one violated the rules,
Right.
and no one violated the court's instructions. But I mean, it was, I'm going to win this case.
The competitive urges really got with it.
The competitive juices continued to flow till the day after trial ended. But as I say, at the end of each day, we might walk back to our respective offices together and have a beer on the way.
Right. Well, that's, you know, I love hearing the stories, and one of the things in this series that has impressed me the most is that, a lot of it has to do with Houston, frankly, in the era that you're talking about, is how much admiration each of you has for your opponents and respect.
Tremendous respect. The people I mentioned by name that I tried cases with, and a lot of them that I tried cases with I didn't mention, are people who were of impeccable credentials, whose integrity was beyond question. If they told me something, I would swear to it as an affidavit that was a true fact.
Well, later in your career, you got into some awfully big cases where you had this added overlay of media wanting to talk to you all the time. Tell us a little bit about that and how you dealt with it and how you think it affected your ability to represent a client.
Well, probably the biggest case that came along later in life was the Texaco Pennzoil litigation. I didn't actually try the case, but when Texaco got hit quite a few $1 billion.
It was a big, big verdict.
Big verdict. Biggest verdict in the history of the world, I think. Joe Jamail, of course, and Baker Botts were on the other side. In handling that case and handling it through the trial court and then handling it through the Court of Appeals in Houston and then all the way up to the Supreme Court, I was one of 4 different lawyers that were involved in the case, but I was sort of the front person because I was in Houston, and 2 lawyers, well, and their entourage were from New York, and one was from Corpus Christi, so I was taking the lead, and it was a Donnybrook.
A lot at stake.
It was a lot at stake. In fact, there was a real question about Texaco being able to make bond while they appealed the case, and we went round and round on that, and I can't tell you how many different judges were involved in recusals and motions for mandamus. It was kind of a law school perfect picture question. I mean, it had every issue that you could imagine involved. And then you throw on top of that the media, not only local, the international media were there the whole time. One of the Wall Street Journal journalists actually wrote a book called Blood and Honor about the trial. And it was a hard-fought, almost 2.5, 3-year debacle. And at the time, I had been chair of the State Bar of Texas, and while we were still on appeal, I had been elected president of the State Bar of Texas. So it put me in a very delicate position vis-a-vis my boss, i.e. the Supreme Court.
That is kind of interesting. Yeah, having to deal with the court on your bar work and maybe taking issue with some of what they were doing in your case.
Took great issue with what happened, and they took great issue with me about my bar budget, and we had quite a standoff until the 11th hour, and that made headline news itself.
What advice would you give about dealing with the press when you get into something like that where they're wanting something from you all the time?
You be aware of your surroundings and just assume that anything that you tell anyone, confidential, off the record, or however, that it will appear in print. And then it will reappear in print, and then it will be magnified, and it will become the genesis of all sorts of rumor mongering.
Right.
Choose your words carefully.
Go from fact to fiction pretty quick.
Yes, and also be careful of how you say what you're about to say, because you have to be aware of the audience who will be listening or reading.
That was probably a fairly stressful period in your life.
My wife tells me it was.
Okay. Well, and she would be the best
I think
judge of
she's
that,
the
I
best
suspect.
judge.
Because when you were state bar president, when you were elected state bar president, there were a lot of issues out there for the State Bar of Texas at the same time.
Yes, we were getting ready for, well, there were a whole host of issues. During my predecessor's term, Joe Nagy, from your part of the country, that was the first year of the Texas lawyers' existence. And of course, they were just getting started, and the State Bar of Texas was their prime source of news. Mm-hmm. So everything we did was front page news.
Right.
And the first thing they detected during Joe's term was that there was drinking of alcohol on premises during the work hours. And Joe and then Executive Director Larry Montgomery sort of got at odds with the Texas lawyer about that, and relationships did not develop very friendly. And I came along, and so in order to stem what I thought was a bad situation, I decided to become Carry Nations, and I just said, we're going to break all the bottles, and we did. And henceforth, no more drinking, no more alcoholic beverage on State Bar of Texas premises.
Which it sounds funny today, but at the time it was a hot issue.
Major issue.
A lot of criticism. You also had a legislative session.
Had a legislative session, and that was a session where the legislature attempted to do two things: to take over all the state bar money that didn't belong to the state, take it out of our treasury and put it in the general revenue fund of the state, and to dole it out as they saw fit. And secondly, to take over our grievance process and to appoint the grievance process and to control it. Okay. And of course, I testified daily in front of either a House committee or a Senate committee about the inadvisability of taking either course of action. Ultimately did prevail on both, but it was touch and go till the end. And I guess I got as much rawhiding in that session as I have ever gotten in my life.
At the same time, you're trying to handle the Pennzoil Texaco appeal and everything else.
Exactly, and then I had the mass disaster with the crash at DFW Airport that I tried to do something with, and I was having a lot of diversity issues, and so I started the program of putting voluntarily 4 positions on the board of directors. They were voluntary; they could not vote, but they could participate.
Right.
And with the idea that when Sunset came around, they would be incorporated in Sunset and made a permanent part of the board of directors, and they were.
And that's where we have minority directors.
Minority directors today. And back then, women were considered minorities. Right. I might add. Right. I'm giving away my age again.
But the bar's better for it.
Absolutely, I think so. And I started something that I'm very proud of, and I want to mention that, and that is I launched the Texas Lawyer Assistance Program. Had a lot of work done on that, and a lot of lawyers talked to me about it. And I launched that officially in January of '89. And that's where lawyers intervene to help other lawyers who may have gotten somewhat impaired over alcohol or drug use in the stress of their practice. And we formed this group to intervene and to try to help these lawyers, because I was seeing an increase
Right.
in legal malpractice claims. And I assumed from some studies I read that part of that was attributable to this impairment. And I got an award for that I really want to mention, because it's the most emotional thing that I have ever.
I want to hear about that, because I think for those who don't know, that became a national model, and it is today a focus of organized
I want to
bars.
read this because I was thinking about this interview, and one of the things you asked me to do was think of some emotional moments that I had in my career, and I think this was the most emotional. It was at the Bar Convention in June of 1995, and the chair of the Texas Lawyer Assistance Program at that time, who's now deceased, asked to present me an award at the award ceremony. And he presented me a large plate. I think it's a 14-inch plate. It's I think it's porcelain, very nicely done with a black inset, totally ebony black inset with lines through it and golden script written in the black. And that plate, and I'm going to read this because at the time it touched me so deeply that I have to say it's the most emotional time that I've ever had in connection with any law work I have done for the Bar Association. From the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program to Jim Sales, past president, State Bar of Texas. From those whose lives he saved, but for your courage and commitment in formally establishing the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, many of us would not be alive today. For our lives and our careers, we thank you. Our debt to you we can never repay, and our gratitude we can never adequately express. Without you, we could never have attempted either. Presented the 2nd of June, 1995, on behalf of the more than 1,500 lawyers who have received help through the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program since it was formally established in January of 1989.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us, because as you know, that was a focus of Martha Dickey's presidency 3 years ago. And again, Terry Tottenham, who's going to be president next year, is going to be a focus of his presidency. And they've even integrated it into the disciplinary system to where, you know, it helps not only lawyers but the public, and you know, really has become a national model.
Well, the reason I wanted to mention this, not only because it touched me personally and emotionally, but a lot of people think that when you do bar work, that, well, it's just bar people that don't want to practice law, that they want to go out and have good times and nice dinners and talk about inane subjects. And I think this demonstrates rather unequivocally that the actions we take and we take seriously in these positions of bar leadership do have a strong impact not only on the members of our profession, but on society and the public that they serve.
Absolutely. And that leads me to something I've been dying to talk to you about, because I had the chance to work with you on this subject matter a little bit, and that's the Texas Equal Access to Justice Commission.
Near and dear to my heart.
You know, when you talked about your 3 Marine Corps principles, believe me, I could see them as when I became president-elect, because you were urging those principles on me in that program and in those that I would appoint to your committees. But I want to hear from you why that's so important to the bar, but also why it's so important to society.
Well, I don't know how much time we have, but
we got plenty of time.
It's important for a couple of reasons, and I think they're very important reasons. The first reason, that only lawyers are licensed by the Supreme Court of Texas to practice law in this state. Nobody else, not the CEO of the biggest company, not the owner of a company, not the best engineer, not the top legislator in the state can represent any person in a legal matter but a lawyer who's licensed by the Supreme Court of Texas and in good standing with the State Bar of Texas. Only we can help. Therefore, that makes us, by default really, guarantors of the rule of law. We hold the keys to the courthouse, and unless we help the people who need legal help, they are essentially barred from the courthouse. And that doesn't just mean from the courthouse itself, but from getting legal help of any kind, even with documents, guardianship papers, home foreclosure papers, whatever. It takes a lawyer to do that. And to me, the rule of law is the underpinning of our whole society. Our Constitution guarantees justice based on the rule of law. That is the fundamental rock on which our founding fathers built this country. And we as lawyers have the obligation, moral and ethical, to ensure that access to the justice system so that people can get justice through the system that we've set up under the rule of law exists for every citizen of this country, not for the privileged few who can afford a lawyer. And so for that reason, I think it is critically important, and I think it's important to the public because the public views us as a learned profession in the law, and they look to us for help when they need help. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people, and I'm talking about working poor people that are trying to make a life for themselves and for their family who simply cannot afford a lawyer because they can barely afford the necessities of life, like the rent, like shoes for the children to go to school, medical treatment, or food on the table. So yes, I think that this is a very important principle, and the Supreme Court could see that when they formed the commission in 2001 and said, we've got a serious problem in this state that we, the profession, need to confront. And so we're going to form the Texas Access to Justice Commission and try to ensure greater delivery of legal services to those who need those services.
And when they called you and asked you to take that task on, how did you approach it? And it reminds me of the 3 Marine Corps principles. I'm kind of going back to the beginning here.
Well, it depends on what you mean by how did I begin, because it was a rather auspicious beginning, again, with the Supreme Court. I did some work on it because it had been functioning for several years, and I had not seen too much action develop out of it. And so I asked Justice O'Neill, who was the liaison person and a member of the commission, if I could get an audience with the whole court, because I had some questions I needed to ask if I was going to take this job for the Supreme Court, because this is a statewide commission for the whole state of Texas. And so they granted me this leave, and I had a 2-hour session with them in chambers where I asked them some tough questions, the bottom line question being basically, if I take this job, justices, will you support me? Because I envision taking some pretty firm and far-reaching action in order to try to mobilize the profession to deliver legal services to those who cannot afford legal help. And I asked each one of them if they would support me, and each one of them, to their credit, looked me straight in the eye and said, we will support you. And I said, with that condition, I will take this job.
I've heard some of them describe it, and some of them I think were afraid to say no, but it's...
No one's afraid of me.
but it does go back to that initial thing that the job's not going to be too big and failure is not an option. And you wanted to ensure that they were with you on that.
Yes, because if I did not have the full support of the Supreme Court, then I would not obviously have the support of the volunteerism of our profession behind me. And if I didn't have that, then I could not really make the programs that I envisioned to work on a statewide basis.
And to their great credit, they followed through and kept their word with you.
The Supreme Court has been, the only term I can think of is magnificent. They have been behind me now for almost 6 years, and I have gone to them with every kind of request imaginable, and they have never once refused me help. They asked me to explain why I need this or why I should do this, and I explained to them, and they said, okay, we're behind you, and we'll do what you ask us to do, and they have never refused.
Now, you served as the chair of the commission until recently.
Till June.
How many years did you hold that position?
A little over 5 years. And
You thought you were retired. Your wife thought you were retired, right?
well, she did, and my cardiologist thought I was. And but the Supreme Court asked me to stay on a little longer as chair emeritus, and that's my position now. And it seems like the work has not stopped. In fact, it may have picked up a little bit.
Well, the poor are always with us, and we know that.
Much more than you think, Harper. When the Supreme Court formed this commission, there were roughly almost 3 million citizens of this state who needed legal help who could not afford it. Today, almost 9 years later, 8.5 years later, there are 5.1 million poor people, poor citizens who need legal help and can't afford it. Does that mean we're not getting out more delivery of legal services? Absolutely not. We have done a prodigious amount of work. We've got 10 major programs working right now statewide that are helping deliver more and more legal services to more and more people. But the problem is the economy has collapsed. Our resource level has gone down just as our need has escalated. And the people who are moving into this state are almost astronomical in number, because this is the one state of all the 50 states that has economically done pretty well during this economic downturn of the last 2 years. Right. So we're picking up all of these people as people that need help.
Well, I know that you work hard on this. I've been to Washington with you when we do ABA days. I've been to the Texas legislature with you and seen firsthand that you really put your money where your mouth is, that you're committed to it.
Well, Harper, it takes, I give this program either here in Austin or in Houston, working through the staff here in Austin. I spend probably 3.5 to 4 days a week, and have up until recently, on this program. And particularly when I was starting it up, and when Emily Jones was the initial executive director before she died, she and I were basically the commission.
Right.
And together we set in motion what I called a strategic plan, but it was a plan that incorporated 9 specific programs or initiatives. And these were designed to do 2 things. One, to deliver more legal services to more people throughout the state of Texas. And secondly, to build a structure within the commission, and each one of these programs being a part of that structure, so that the commission each year could look at each one and modify it as needed or restructure it if that were needed. And at the same time, to establish without question the institutionalization of this commission as a permanent structure of the Supreme Court that would continue to address the problem of the working poor and the poor citizens of this state going into the future, long after I am no longer chairman. The current commissioners are changed with new commissioners, and members of the court may have changed. But the commission will continue, because I think we've set the foundation strongly enough that it will continue its own momentum.
Well, you know, Jim, I think it's important for people who have an opportunity to watch this interview. You didn't come to this game late. You've always been a supporter of access to justice in your career in Houston. And
yes, in 1980, I was president of the Houston Bar, and I was on the board at that time of Gulf Coast Legal Foundation, which is a legal service corporation funded organization. And they help the poor people, but they have to be poor within the meaning of the federal guidelines, which means basically you can't be working and get help.
Right.
And so I thought, this seems like a grave injustice, because I know a lot of working poor people that are trying to make a living, but they cannot afford a dime's worth of legal services. and they're getting shut out of the system. So I created, with the help of my board of directors, the Houston Volunteer Lawyer Program. We launched it in March of 1981, and it is going full swing today. And it's designed to help what I call the working poor, the people who are above the federal poverty guidelines, but well beneath what we call regular poverty guidelines. And we still have more work to do than we can possibly handle through the Houston Volunteer Lawyer Program, which I like to take credit, but I can't. But a lot of good presidents who have followed me have built on that program, and now I think it is probably the premier pro bono program in the United States. And at the same time, we set up the mechanism to set up a foundation, which today is called the Houston Bar Foundation, to help fund part of the activities of Houston Volunteer Lawyer Program.
And I think a lot of folks would, view you as a defense lawyer in a big firm. What does he care about poor people?
And a Republican on top of that,
And on top of that, that's why I want to make the point, because I was doing a little preparation to get ready for this, and you've always been an advocate not only for the poor in terms of legal services, but also for the death row inmates and things like that. You've done a lot of writing and effort in that regard.
I did. I know the Fifth Circuit asked me when I first became president of the State Bar if I would help them to get more volunteers to volunteer to represent death row inmates, because what was happening was the Fifth Circuit was not able to hear the habeas corpus petitions and other relief sought by inmates condemned to death because there were no lawyers to represent them. And so basically they were in a standstill position. And so part of my coming into the presidency was to try to mobilize as many people in the profession as I could to volunteer their services to help the indigent on death row to get a hearing that they were entitled to under the Constitution before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
And you had some success with that.
We had some, and it's built, and over the years it's gotten better and better. We still need more help, but it's gotten much better.
Let's move over now to kind of the personal side. We've talked a little bit about your family. Your wife's name is Buna.
Yes.
And I guess y'all been together since Weimar days?
I started dating her when she was a junior in high school and I was a senior. We started going together, and then I went to the University of Texas and I continued to date her from afar. But then she moved up here and went to Brackenridge Hospital. Back then they didn't have a nurses program at UT. Mm-hmm. So they were affiliated with Blinn, but she went to school at Brackenridge Hospital and became a registered nurse through that hospital the same year that we married. And I dated her through college and we got married. It was a courtship that was based on love, I assure you, because I barely had enough money to eat one meal a day when I was in undergraduate school. And so when we had a date, I had to walk from 19th Street basically to Brackenridge Hospital and pick her up, and then we would walk from Brackenridge Hospital through the Capitol, down Congress, and eat a little dinner at the Piggly Wiggly, I think it was called, or Piccadilly, I forget the name of it now. It's closed. And then go to one of the theaters, the Paramount or one of those Metropolitan, take a movie in, and then we'd walk back.
And whatever you did, it stuck.
It stuck. She's been with me for 53 and very soon 54 years, and she has been the center of my life since before I married her, and she clearly is the center of my life to this day. I mean, without her, I would be nothing. I could be nothing. I mean, she's my support and she's my inspiration.
Well, I know you're very proud of your children. Both of your sons currently serve on the State Bar Board of Directors. Yes. Both have been presidents of large metropolitan bars, but tell us about your family.
Well, Mark was the one that was born overseas when I was in the Marine Corps and didn't see his daddy till he was a year old. He became an engineer, went to A&M, became an engineer, but after 4 years with Brown and Root trying to build dams, he decided that was not his cup of tea. So he came to me and he said, "Daddy, can you help me? I want to go to Baylor Law School." So he went to Baylor, and I must say he did much better at Baylor Law School than he did as an engineer at A&M. And from Baylor. He graduated. He went to a firm called Hughes and Luce and stayed with them till they merged recently with a firm now called K&L Gates, which is a large international firm. But he was president of the Dallas Bar Association about 3 years ago and is just now finishing up on the board that you served as president of.
Keeps me up way too late at night.
But he claims the same to you, Harper. But
Well,
y'all make a mean tune together on your
he's a good guitar player.
steel guitar playing.
Yeah.
My daughter Debbie went to University of Texas. She went to pharmacy school, became a pharmacist. Was head of a pharmacy in Houston, but after about 4 years, almost 5, she came to me and said, "Dad, there's a glass ceiling. Women cannot progress in pharmacy because you can only make money if you go into marketing or management, and women can't do either right now. So will you help me go to South Texas College of Law since I can work and also go to school?" So yeah, I said, "Yes, I'll help you." I was on the board at that time, so it helped too. And so she went and got her degree, started to work at Andrews Kurth, a big firm in their litigation department. About a year into her practice, the entire litigation department broke up into parts and they all left. So she went with a group that was called Cruz, Allen, Scott, and Henderson. And probably before April the 30th, there will be a new firm called Henderson, well, I guess it would not hurt to mention the name. I'm kind of reluctant to do so, but well, it'll be called Henderson, Elmore, and Block. And her name is Elmore. She married Philip Elmore, and so she goes by the name Elmore. And so Debbie Elmore, it'll be what I call the HEB law firm, Henderson, Elmore, and Block. And my youngest son, Travis, went to Texas. He's an accountant, and he's also got his law degree from Texas. He was Grand Chancellor and went to work for a Houston firm of Baker and Botts. Is a trial partner there, and has just finished serving as president of the Houston Bar Association. And I might say to his credit, he started the veterans program at the Houston Bar that has proven to be a big hit and a big success in the Houston community. And he currently serves on the board with Harper, and I know enjoys very much the work that he's done with the bar.
And I know that President-elect Terry Tottenham is taking his Veterans Initiative kind of statewide. So again, a model for others to follow. Jim, tell briefly, you know, it's hard to be a lawyer. We hear the lawyer is a jealous mistress, the law is a jealous mistress. Tell us how you tried to balance family and staying in good health and that sort of thing while you practice law.
Well, I guess in my case, I would have to honestly and truthfully admit that I don't balance it very well. My wife balances it very well, and that's why she is the key to this whole relationship, because she keeps the balance in the family. And when I was much younger and trying a lot of lawsuits and doing a lot of traveling, my children were in school, both in junior high and in high school, and they all were involved in football and baseball and basketball and the band and you name it. And the one thing that I never did in all the years, I don't think I missed a single PTA meeting or a single function that they participated in junior high or in high school, ever. No matter where I made a point to work around it. Even if I had to be out of town, I'd work around it. I didn't do much else, but I made everything that they were involved with. Otherwise, my wife made sure that they got the discipline and the training and the threats about what Dad would do to them if they didn't obey her.
That probably worked pretty well.
It worked very well.
Well, I knowing your kids, yeah, you did very well.
Well, thank you.
And Buna did as well.
I'm proud of them, but they're a tribute to their mother, not to their dad.
Well, and I don't completely disagree with that. She's a great lady. If a young person came to you today, one of your grandkids, and said, "I want to be a lawyer," what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would tell them the facts of life. I'd give them a pretty credible picture of what the economy is like today and the difficulties that lawyers coming out of law school today have and the debt that they will incur in getting that education. But I would tell them that if they truly like the law, if they're motivated to want to be a lawyer, and they have the aptitude to be a lawyer, not a forced position, but one that they truly enjoy, that by all means go to law school, get that law degree. There is opportunity in the law. There's a lot of opportunity in the law. And someone who's willing to work hard and has some aptitude for it will do well. But even if you don't go into the law with a law degree, being trained in the discipline of law is such great training that it enables a person with a law degree to do almost any job there is to do other than medicine or engineering. A person who is truly trained in the law is capable of running any major corporation, of doing any job that this country has to offer other than perhaps medicine or engineering.
Well, you and I share admiration for a quote, because I've seen it in some of your writing and I've seen it in some of mine, a Winston Churchill quote.
Sir Winston Churchill's my all-time favorite.
So he said, we make a living by what we get, and we make a life by what we give.
That is so true.
And I know that you have lived that throughout your career, and we're better for it. Jim, I appreciate so much you joining us
Well,
today.
Harper, I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about my life as a lawyer. It's great to reminisce, and the nostalgia that it precipitates in me makes this a unusually great hour for me.
Well, thank you very much.